I'm Connor Wold and welcome back to another episode of Forgotten Oscar Films. And this week we're going to be looking at the 1962 class of films and our very first musical. So, if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is I break down a film that was nominated for Best Picture that I believe that has been forgotten. We started with the year 1988 and we've been working backwards. We're now at the year 1962. We've got a few more episodes left, a couple more months until we jump right back into the Oscar season, which is going to be a lot of fun, but I'm having so much fun with this series. We look at the other 5 nominees because I think it's crucial to understand the history, to really understand maybe why film's been forgotten compared to some of the others in this class. And I also think of give my thoughts on the film and try to answer that central question as to why it's been forgotten. So, starting off with the first nominee, we have one of the greatest movies of all time, in my opinion. A movie I saw just recently, about a year ago, on the big screen for the very first time, Lawrence of Arabia. It truly is one of the best movies of all time. It's been remembered. It's high up on many directors' favorite lists of all time and on many cinephiles' favorite lists of all time. It's a movie that I've been wanting to see, but I've waited to see it on the big screen because I felt like that was the kind of movie. And I know a lot of people say that, you have to check this on the big screen, but I can't imagine any other experience seeing the film. And I tried actually watching the film because I loved it so much at my home on my TV, and that wasn't even good enough. It was just a film that every time it's in theaters, now I have to go see it. It's a film that demands it to be seen on the big screen because it's just, the experience is so much different, I would imagine, and I'm so glad I did wait to see it. But definitely, if you haven't checked it out, wait and see Lawrence of Arabia on the big screen. Another nominee here we have is another classic movie, To Kill a Mockingbird. I covered it on my Old on Old series, which you can check out on my YouTube channel, where I looked at an old movie that I'd never seen before. To Kill a Mockingbird was one of those. I talked more about its history. It's a classic American novel, especially because it's been taught in schools and will be taught in schools for so many years. I think it has a certain legacy, and the film is almost always shown after sort of the reading of the book. Even my high school here in Canada also taught it. So it's one of those most remembered movies, I think, especially amongst the general public, as it's sort of a general name. And then we sort of get less maybe remembered films, something like The Longest Day, which is a World War II film about the D-Day invasion, sort of the large technical achievement with the big stars of the time. I sort of group it within some of these other 60s action war films. So I still think it's remembered. I still think people who like those films, maybe their parents have sort of passed them down through generations with sort of these big stars. But unfortunately, I think this one is maybe a film that will be lost to time, just because when we think of a film that encapsulates World War II, or even really specifically D-Day, that attack and that battle, we think of Saving Private Ryan in those first 15 minutes. So I'm not sure if this is going to be necessarily the most remembered when so many people connect to that Saving Private Ryan moment, which is, yes, it's modern, but it has already cemented itself within film history. And that, for example, is being shown in history classes and not The Longest Day, which is maybe unfortunate. I haven't seen it, but I have to check that one out for sure. And then for these last 2 bottom categories, the last nominee that I didn't choose was Mutiny on the Bounty. I felt it was a little bit of a retread based on what we talked about with the Cleopatra a couple weeks ago now. Just sort of, this is another film which we've seen a trend now, even up until the late 60s, where the studios are really trying to grasp and hold on to all the control they have, even though the changes are clearly evolving and the studio system is clearly falling apart. They still have an incredible amount of influence within the Oscars. Mutiny on the Bounty was a film that's been in production for over 2 years. It got middling reviews at best. It was a huge, not a box office bomb. I don't think it made money, but I think it's made its money back, but it was still one of the most expensive movies ever made, and really sort of destroyed the pirate subgenre of films until really Pirates of the Caribbean revitalized it. I mean, it was sort of seen as don't shoot on the water, don't shoot on location, Mutiny on the Bounty, Waterworld, all these water-based movies, which of course have to be pirate movies. They're almost always disasters, and they almost never make their money back. So it was sort of a curse until really the pirates brought it back. But even still, the pirates movies have been the only films, the pirate films at least, to sort of maintain the audience's attraction. But this is a film that, like I said, the studios really bought the Oscars for this. They got the middling reviews. They didn't get a lot of money at the box office, or didn't really make a lot of its money back at the box office. Yet still managed to get Best Picture nomination, even though it didn't get get a Best Director nomination. And I really think, as we're going back throughout these years, the Best Director nominations are really the ones that people sort of look towards as the actual Best Picture winners, but they sort of do that as sort of a secondary prize. I think it was a couple weeks ago we saw that only 2 of the nominees were nominated for Best Picture. It was also nominated for Best Director, and that's a common theme, same here this year as well. But the film we're going to be talking about today is The Music Man, a musical, and it's a musical I've been wanting to talk about for a while because it's definitely a classic sort of story structure and sort of idealized version of what I think of when I think of these sort of these 50s, 60s studio musicals. Bright, colorful. This case very much the 60s in the sense that it was based off a play. That's been sort of the running theme throughout the 60s, is that British has been dominating, and so has musicals specifically based off Broadway plays. We have Mary Poppins, we have My Fair Lady, and really other just general plays, something like Anne of the Thousand Days we covered. This, similarly, a 1957 play, eventually adopted into this adaptation of the musical. I would say that maybe it's not necessarily forgotten. This and Mutiny on the Bounty maybe are on the sort of bottom tier of this list. But I want to talk about a musical, and I think that while this year, was sort of the Best Picture is always an American sense. I mean, this year has an amazing foreign films. Ivan's Childhood, last year Marienbad, Jules and Jim. I mean, there's a lot of great films that could have been nominated for, I think La Dolce Vita was this year maybe. A lot of films that could have gotten nominated for Best Picture as well, that I think that sort of maybe has stayed the test of time versus something like Mutiny on the Bounty. But while I think The Music Man is maybe well liked within sort of musical fans and that community and sort of theater kids, I don't think it's necessarily jumped into the larger general population. I think that when people talk about sort of the greatest musicals of all time, there are a couple from this era. I would say An American in Paris, On the Town, Singing in the Rain, and then of course you go the 70s, maybe a little bit more gritty, maybe a little bit All That Jazz, Cabaret. 80s sort of less so, but you would maybe go with something like Footloose or Flashdance or Fame and that sort of trilogy there. And then into the 90s and early 2000s, of course you have sort of adaptations like Moulin Rouge in Chicago. But nowadays we still have movies like that at sort of a resurgence. So the musical genre I still think is always going to exist, but this is really sort of the peak of it and the height of it, I would say, in every sense of just its construction. It has a very sort of simple storyline. You can definitely see this is made for a musical. There's lots of numbers. There's very little sort of dialogue in that sense, and it's big and it's large and it's bright and it's colorful and it's a musical and it's unabashedly. And transitioning to my thoughts, that's actually what I really enjoyed about it. I did enjoy this movie, but you have to understand that it is a musical, and I'm a fan of musicals, so therefore I think I enjoyed this one because of that. The acting is not this subtle sort of, even you would say, I don't know, Her or Arrival or The Master, some of these sort of brilliant performances that I like of the more modern movies. It's very much a big performance, very much theater in a lot of ways, because they would say theater, you have to be bigger because you have to express those emotions to the people at the back of the theater, whereas movies you want to be small because you see every little minute thing, especially when you're doing a close-up scene, for example. But this is very much filmed like a theater musical. There's very little close-ups. I don't think there's even a single close-up. It's always sort of medium up. It's sort of the close-up of the movie. We almost always see wides and these multiple sort of mass large groups of people, almost Bugsby Berkeley in a sense, where there's sort of these beautiful costumes and beautiful sets, and they have this great town that's clearly, it's either a really well-built set and it looks like a well-built set, and the sort of lighting is very studio lighting, and they can move the camera around, and there's just lots of people and lots of colors and lots of amazing costumes. But I think that aspect is good, and I really enjoy the songs. I think sometimes it does sort of fall into maybe the trappings of a bad musical, where I think that some of the exposition is completely told through dialogue, where you'll have a song and you'll have a quick 2-minute scene of exposition, then we'll have another song, then another quick scene of exposition. So we don't really necessarily, I wouldn't say I maybe empathize with sort of the love story that was going on, but they make it simple for that reason, so you can sort of just follow it along. I much maybe prefer some of the exposition within the songs, sort of trying to trust the viewer that they'll be able to pick up the story throughout the sort of songs, and just not have the songs be catchy and fun, because it's a 2.5-hour movie that's long. There's a lot of those sort of catchy, fun songs, but what I really enjoyed was sort of, I think a guy, someone like Stephen Sondheim, like I mentioned, is just a great, he did Sweeney Todd, he did West Side Story. He's just a great lyricist, and he's one of the ultimate sort of masters in just making sure he's able to tell the stories with the songs, that the songs don't necessarily feel meaningless. And I think in the 2.5-hour movie, I think maybe a couple songs could have been cut, because there are just a lot of those sort of fun, great songs, but maybe not a lot to contribute to the overall story. Of course, Shirley Jones and Robert Preston do a great job here as the two leads. Robert Preston just being so charming, and you can clearly understand him as a con man, and you understand his sort of appeal and the sort of unique, clever ways that they're able to sort of pull that off is really interesting, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. And really, I think this is actually a good movie for kids. It's got a great, quick pace. It's generally family-friendly. It's got sort of a good message in that sense. It's very old-fashioned, old-timey in that sense, but I think it falls into the sort of that musical aspect where people enjoy that about the movie. I think people sort of resonate to that aspect of it, ultimately. But ultimately, actually, why this hasn't been remembered, I think that musicals sort of come and go with sort of the changes and the times. More recently, we have something like La La Land or The Greatest Showman, which are original movie musicals that made a lot of money at the box office. So clearly there's a demand right now. You can maybe argue that something to do with the political climate within the States or across the world, trade wars, you can say anything. Maybe you can look back as a film historian. I haven't done that too much digging, but I do know that at this time, we are sort of into musicals. I wouldn't be surprised if more studios start to put out these, even though we're so heavily reliant on IP. We're still getting something like the Cats musical, which is expected to be an Oscar play this year, surprisingly enough, even though that trailer sort of creeps some people out, including myself. But I think ultimately that this film will be well beloved in sort of a cult classic within the musical theater genre, theater kids sort of genre of people. I actually sort of liken it to sort of the big horror fans, people who really love horror movies, because if you're a horror fan, yes, you love Halloween, but you really like Halloween 3 because it's sort of a little cheesier, a little more campy. It sort of explores the dynamics of the genre a little bit more. Or something like you like New Nightmare. You like these sort of films that, yes, everyone likes. Sort of the originals, and the general film-going public likes those originals, but the real hardcore people like Halloween 3 versus Halloween. I think that's a good comparison. And conversely, within sort of the musical sub-community, I guess you would say, of people who love musicals, people really like Grease. Everyone sort of really likes Grease, but the musical people actually maybe secretly like Grease 2 a little bit more. I mean, Michelle Pfeiffer's so great in it. It's totally sort of studio and sort of corny and cheesy in a lot of ways, but that's sort of what you like about it, because unabashedly over the top and dramatic, and this is a show, and we're going to put on our smiles on and be big and large and fun and quick and just a lot of fun and escapist in a lot of ways, and embrace that in a lot of ways. I think, something like Grease 2 does, which is why that community really likes it. So I think ultimately The Music Man is going to be a film that is embraced by the musical community for generations to come as a sort of a classic 50s, 60s studio musical. However, to the general sort of film-going public, or just sort of everyone, I'm not sure if The Music Man will be necessarily as well remembered as something like Singing in the Rain, for example. But maybe that's too high of a bar to put it up against. Who knows? But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know some of your favorite musicals of all time, maybe 50s, 60s musicals. I'd love to hear in the comments down below. That's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. And until next time, stay tuned.